Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I am actually live. At least my iPad is telling me as much. Today we have an actually pretty jam-packed live stream planned, or I have a live stream planned for you. I hope people join, tune into the live chat. Let me know what they think. Let me know what they would like to see me comment on. As always, thank you so much for a very nice 6,900 subscriber count. Absolutely amazing. Thompson Quiz saying hi. Really always glad when people can join early on, then you sort of get the full MarkTech experience. So I'm really glad about that. As always, please let me know if the audio and video quality is working right for you. I know it can sometimes be a pain. We've had some streaming problems in the past. Anybody who is new here or is just trying out more content, please consider subscribing if you haven't yet. Please consider supporting the channel live if you really enjoy the content. Stuff like you can find my Patreon link in the channel description. You can send super chats or super stickers, but that's just a small info from me. You're saying you hope it's an iPad mini. Well, let's get started with that, right? Well, I think the iPad mini is sort of where I believe we should start, right? We recently got some rumors about, like, around the last week to now, we have been getting more and more info of stuff that might either be part of an Apple October event or maybe of a very large, like, you know, like multi-week announcement through Apple's news announcements. So basically like a blog post. But the iPad mini definitely seems to be front and center. We seem to have also gotten more information now about stuff like the iPad 11th gen and an M2 based iPad Air, but definitely the iPad mini 7 is what we have gotten some more concrete infos recently. You're also saying they should get new colors. Well, that would be interesting, right? Also, the current colors are pretty subdued. If you, by the way, hear any crazy sounds in the background, that's my cat running throughout the entire apartment at full speed and then crashing against walls. I guess she just wants attention. So the iPad mini, well, as you know, when Apple introduced the redesign, right, that was very iPad Pro-like, there was an issue called jelly scrolling, and basically you were scrolling and half the page was like a little further alongside that scrolling movement than the other. That came from supposedly a wrong panel alignment, right? A lot of Apple had specifically like tuned screens earlier on for like portrait mode, but then people were still using them in landscape or the other way around, right? And supposedly Apple will now be fixing that, but unfortunately not necessarily quite the way we might have wanted, which of course my favorite way would have been to introduce a much faster screen, right? ProMotion screen, 120 hertz, finally moving up from 60. Please give me a second. All right. You're saying you don't know if they make a new Apple Pencil. I really see make an Apple Pencil right now. I think there probably is a good moment to introduce an Apple Pencil 3 next year with like the redesigned iPad Pro. But we might want to get a new Apple Pencil if also the rumors about an upgraded 11th gen iPad are correct. But without losing myself, let me just continue with the iPad mini stuff, right? A new report on Weibo. This is where a lot of this seems to be coming from recently. It's not bad universally, Weibo, so this is why I'm covering it. There are often rumors that I'm not covering on this channel, but Weibo seems to not be the worst, and it's been kind of regurgitated by the likes of 9to5Mac, Mac Rumors, Apple Insider, Cult of Mac, etc. So I think it's kind of reasonable for me to throw like my 2 cents into the ring here. Thompson Quiz, you're saying what's next? You mean like what would be next in like an Apple Pencil? Well, my suggestion for a new Apple Pencil would be something that fixes the atrocious like Apple Pencil compromise that we currently have in the 10th gen iPad, right? We have like the problem with obviously because Apple wanted a center camera in landscape mode rather than portrait, we don't have anything how you could connect an Apple Pencil 2 to it without either relocating the camera or putting the magnet in a very weird space, maybe putting it on the back, similar to what Samsung has been doing. But overall, I'm sorry, there was just a lot of stuff going on. I'm muting whenever there's anything private going on. You're saying they should definitely make a lot of color pencils for the, yeah, well, Apple likes like their iconic accessories white, right? I mean, it's like earpods, AirPods, all their cables, right? I don't see why they would redesign the Apple, like give the Apple Pencil new colors. I think they will just leave that to the likes of D brand, you know? I apologize if I have to sigh a little bit during it. It's been a long day. I'm really interested in what I'm talking about, but I am a little tired. So, they're talking about how jelly scrolling would be potentially fixed on the new iPad Mini 7. That Apple changes the screen assembly direction, right? So there's supposedly no 120 hertz, though we have heard prior rumors about that. It seems though like most likely that it will retain 60 hertz refresh rate. I personally think iPads below the iPad Pro will get 120 hertz once the iPad Pros get OLED. I think that is likely because at that point there would be like a nice differentiation, similar to how the iPhones Pro and the iPhones non-Pro, right, are basically only differentiated at this point by LTPO, by 120 hertz capabilities, by adaptive refresh rate, and by the ability to enable always on display. It's not like always on display would be inherently unworkable on the lower end iPhones. Hell, they could easily run it like 90 hertz without any problems, but this is how Apple chooses to differentiate their products. And the iPad Pro 11-inch does not even have a mini LED screen, so I don't expect the iPad Mini 7, unfortunately, to get 120 hertz. But supposedly it will fix jelly scrolling. Maybe Apple will also make the screen a little faster, right? A screen does not only get faster by running more frames per second, but also by having those frames more quickly come up on the panel, right? That's called response time, and black to white levels on pixels and stuff like that. So Apple could change that meaningfully. And now IPS panels are never known to be necessarily the fastest panels out there, but at least that would be one thing that Apple could improve while still maintaining 60 hertz, while still not going with mini LED or OLED or anything else like it. I don't think they should call it iPad Mini 7, more like iPad Mini something. They will not call it iPad Mini 7. The 7 is just for us. It's basically about iPad Mini 7th gen, right? We can, I apologize to you in advance. I will blind you in a second, right? So bear with it. 1, 2, 3. Right, when we go to like the iPad, right? You can see the iPad Mini, even if like tech specs, it's just an iPad Mini, right? There's no like number branding or anything else like that. Even when we compare like iPads, right? You see it's like designated 6th gen for now, and the new one would just be 7th gen. It's similar how we aren't getting an iPad Air 6th gen, we are getting an M2 based iPad Air. Apple uses like the generation for like differentiation obviously on their website and stuff, but it's not active branding. It's just what we use as a shorthand in the tech community to know what exact product we are talking about, and saying iPad mini 7 will be faster than saying iPad mini 7th gen, right? So what else do we have here? In addition to the new display, Instant Digital also says the iPad mini 7 will feature an upgraded front-facing camera, so that most likely will be a camera with support for center stage, which is not my favorite camera. I think it's pretty low quality in comparison to a lot of, obviously, like even your standard ultra wide that you would get on an iPhone on the back. But it has a fun feature. It's pretty easy to market for Apple, so I kind of understand why they might want to go with that. And the other point, it would be an A16 chip. Now, if we, I think I'll have to actually keep Apple open, right? Because there is some valuable insight here. Oh my god, the dogs outside are going crazy apparently. Right, when we go to like the iPad mini 6th gen, and then let's compare it to the latest iPad Air and the latest iPad Pro, right? Well, this is running an A15 chip. Now, to also be more precise, it's running an A15 chip with 4 gigs of RAM. So my suggestion here would be, if we actually get this very small upgrade from A15 to A16, I mean, anybody who went from an iPhone 13 Pro to a 14 Pro knows that it's by no means like the largest technological step. Guys, let me just close the window. I cannot escape sounds around me today. It's like crazy how stressful it is. And the color options generally in Apple are too light. They should make it more vibrant. Well, we've had years that are very vibrant, right? It's not like it's exclusively like Apple going for very muted colors. It's, I think, very precisely the point that it's been more recent Apple development that people are not too happy about. So we would be going just from an A15 to an A16. Now, what a lot of people don't know, the iPad mini actually has the fully enabled A15 chip with 5 GPU cores, so it wasn't even been down to 4 cores as it was on the iPhones 13 and 13 mini. So my suggestion here would be that the only real differentiation point that would be really noticeable here would be if it also has more RAM, though I don't expect the A16 to suddenly run center stage or anything else like that. So I think the iPad mini would still be limited to USB 3 speeds, right? It would not get center stage support. It would not get like a full 8 gigs of RAM. It would not get the latest generation of chips. Now, there is a counterpoint to this, and if we actually go back to that iPad mini that we are talking about, that was introduced actually exactly 2 years ago, which means it was announced at the same time as the iPhone 13 was. And it had the latest generation chip. So could we actually potentially get an iPad mini that has an A17 chip, right? You could conceivably make it an A17 and not an A17 Pro, by which you could then go with like a 5-core GPU versus a full 6-core GPU on the iPhone 15 Pro. You would probably, 10 gigabits per second output would be still enough for the iPad mini. 4K 60 would still be enough for the iPad mini, obviously. So that might still be in the car parts. I don't know just how much 3nm supply Apple has, but that would be my theory to a degree. Now, whether or not an iPad mini needs other improvements, like potentially like Wi-Fi 6E, I don't know, right? It's currently at Wi-Fi 6. Only the Pros, the iPad Pros currently are at Wi-Fi 6E. Supposedly the next gen iPad Air will get Wi-Fi 6E. I assume we would also get a new cellular modem, which obviously could be greatly improved from the old one. So much more efficient, higher speeds, etc. And the other thing we desperately need to fix is this: 64 gigs of storage. Look, I know the iPad mini starts at a comparatively low price with $500 versus iPhone, like relatively new iPhone starting at $800, but 64 gigs, it just ain't enough. Iftas, you're saying, or Ifat, I'm sorry, you're saying they should give it Face ID. I do believe that eventually basically all Apple devices will go with Face ID. I think the only thing going against it is, right, Apple already has like their existing design. They've already have all the logistics going for their power button that's also like a fingerprint sensor. So I believe if we get Face ID, it would be more on like a redesign, right? An iPad mini 8th generation and then an iPad Air 7th generation, right? That's when I would expect Face ID to come. Yeah, and the colors are like, you're saying, you think it's 5 colors. So it's 5 colors on the iPad Air. It's only 4 colors actually on the iPad mini, right? On the iPad Air and mini, we have like the shared space gray and starlight colors here, right? Then we have a pink that also both offer, though I believe it's like slightly different between them. Then we have purple and purple. But then we also have a really nice blue, my favorite color by far, on the iPad Air. So yeah, the iPad mini does not even offer all the playfulness of an iPad Air. So that's actually pretty fucked up if you ask me. But yeah, if we get updates to both of them, we definitely, I think, deserve, at the same base prices of $500 and $600, they both need to have 128 gigs of storage. Otherwise, I don't think this will be an acceptable upgrade whatsoever. It's just too little. You're using the blue one right now. You mean like the Air, right? I don't think there was a blue mini, right? Or did they change colors mid-gen? I probably wouldn't remember that, but that goes outside my expertise here. Here, I think this is a good explanation, by the way, of jelly scrolling. For those unfamiliar, jelly scrolling is when half of a device's display, it's not necessarily half and half, it's more like it's a gradual thing, but it looks like it's half and half. Refreshes noticeably slower than the other half. This result is a sort of wobble effect. Yeah, I think wobble effect is probably like the best way to put it. Yeah, so this would solve it. However, this is to a degree, right, by rearranging how the screen is basically like where the display controller comes from, to put it in like the simplest words, I guess. So the iPad mini would probably be like the lead event here. However, we also have other rumors. One of them is about a 24-inch iMac refresh. And for months and now basically years since the iMac hasn't been refreshed, ever since its introduction with the M1, like its reintroduction with the M1, right, we have heard that we are still due like a 27-inch iMac, right? People have said, okay, this was just an option that Apple got out, right? It's sort of a compromise between the previous 21 inches and the 27-inch models. And there were long-time rumors that Apple's larger displays would actually go beyond 27 inches to like 30 inches. You're saying the colors in the photo is nice. Yeah, well, it like comes down to like where you shoot them, right? I guess, because I do believe that in real life, where we also have like unpredictable artificial light sources and stuff like that, those colors unfortunately don't look quite as nice as they do in like promo images, right? I've tested those things out in like the Apple store. They're not as nice as they could be. I do think they need to be a little more saturated. And by the way, just for people who say that Apple does not make like saturated colors, look at this here. Those are super saturated on the back. Now Apple deliberately goes pretty like low saturation, but even that is like a pretty vibrant green still by most Apple standards, right? Look at the iMac, the current M1 iMac, the redesigned iMac. And it's not like even Apple goes for like super popular colors like your blues and stuff like that. They have like yellow and orange, which, look, I know those aren't like by default unpopular colors, but it's not like they're red and blue, right? And even it's pink, right? Apple calls this pink, but it's like pretty much red on the back. So yeah, it's not like Apple does not know how to do very prominent, very vibrant colors on the back. Look at even like this purple, right? This purple versus the purple we had just seen on the iPad side, that's ridiculous. And then the blue is like absolutely gorgeous. I want this blue absolutely everywhere. Like I want Apple to have as many aluminum unibody devices as possible, if that means we can get this blue on as many devices as possible. Yeah, Ifat, right, you're agreeing with me. That's awesome. By the way, I've not seen you here in previous streams. Thank you so much for joining. I know we've had like a lot of people joining the channel, so I'm trying to get to know as many of you as possible. So now there's also another problem though with the iMac, right? Now this iMac is not only stuck currently with M1 versus most Macs now being on M2. Well, the other point about that is about this iMac, of course, beyond just its display size, it's also the fact that it's now a little weirdly positioned, right? We do have the Mac Mini, which offers more performance thanks to it being M2. We do have the Mac Studio, which offers way more performance, and while sure it's more expensive by default, once you actually add a little bit of extra storage or RAM into this, it's not like it will be a really good competitor to an M2 Max based Mac Studio, right? Sure, you get the screen, you get your keyboards and mice and all that jazz, but what about the people that already have a screen, right? What about the people that maybe move around a lot with their like mini Mac and they don't really care about having one stationary screen on their desk? They might connect it instead to a TV or something like that. But with this, the iMac is now in a very, very weird spot. Now it seems like if you actually want to configure it to a higher configuration, you will only get it in November. Now we are talking about a 2-year-old product by this point. It should not have any kind of shortages. So the thought behind this is, well, are we getting a refresh? Oh, Ifat, you're saying you have never replied in streams. That's why. Oh, well, I'm glad you were watching. I know we always have like more people watching than we have commenting. Obviously, that's what happens with every stream, but because the channel was like basically 90% of the subscribers that you see here have joined in the last month, so many people did not even yet have a chance to really like join a live stream like early on or something like that. Now the other problem for it, it's not just the value proposition. I would wager there are probably enough fans of the iMac to still buy a refreshed model. However, now is the question, well, how is it going to be refreshed? And the question here is, are we in fact going to get M2 and M2 Pro chips? Because for such a long period of time, people have said that it's more likely that it would get M3 chips. right? Whether that means an M3 and an M3 Pro, or maybe just an M3 for the 24-inch model and then an M3 Pro for a 27 or 30-inch model. Obviously, that is a little unclear, but for months and months, we've believed that we would only get an iMac refresh when we were due an M3 update. Now, by all accounts, M3 will probably not be coming this year at all. It probably will come pretty early next year, maybe time for like a nice spring refresh of many Macs, right? Maybe it will come first to like the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros even before it comes to like a next-gen MacBook Air, right? We might get M3 Pros before we get M3s. It's all unclear. But the surprising thing here is that we might get an iMac that has the same chip that was introduced last summer in the 13-inch MacBook Air, and now we have the 15-inch MacBook Air that brought that chip in WWDC again. But now we will apparently have that chip in like an October announcement. That would be questionable. Like, I don't know which person looks at the M1 iMac and thinks like, oh no, I need a little bit more performance. M2 would be perfect. I don't need a better screen. I don't need a larger screen. I don't need much updated spec. But I need an M2. So no, I don't know. Like, we also have like other rumors here about it, right? That it would get supposedly Wi-Fi 6E. It would get 4 Thunderbolt ports. I assume that would come with the M2 Pro because that one has many more PCIe lanes. It would get Bluetooth 5.3, which is now standard across basically every modern Apple product. So that would be part of it. However, that would be really, really confusing. Because also, like, the one leaker that we trust in, right, our basically Apple tech rumor Jesus, Mark Gurman, has repeatedly claimed that the next 24-inch iMac will be equipped with M3. Now, we do know that we are getting an M2 iPad Air, for example. We know that so much that I basically didn't even open like any rumor site about it, because if we actually go to like the tech specs from Apple, right, it's like such a clear upgrade here, right? You go with an M2 chip, the same one as you have in the Pros, but then you still, I guess it makes more sense to compare it against the 11-inch iPad, right? But then you still don't give it ProMotion. You maybe give it Wi-Fi 6E, and stuff like that, right? Here you maybe not give it Thunderbolt quite, you keep it with like 10 gigabits per second USB-C, you don't give it an ultra-wide camera, and you have a nicely differentiated product. Hell, if you really wanted to, right, you could even go with a 9-core GPU version of the M2 in the next-gen iPad Air. That to me makes sense. It's a cheaper product, it's a mid-range product at best, right? So of course it's going to be equipped with not the absolute like highest end chip from day one. But the problem with the iMac is, well, the iMac is nothing at this point. It's not exciting. It for some reason has not been upgraded with the M2 when everything else has been. So at this point in Apple's case, I would just tell them to not release an M2 iMac and wait until they have M3 ready. Would Apple be able to make a TV? Yes, Apple would be able to, but the problem with TVs is like they do target a lot more products, so Apple would have to do a lot of pretty standard stuff that they might not really care about, right? It would, if Apple really wanted to deliver all like your HDMI 2.1 specifications, all your different kind of color profiles and stuff like that, I assume Apple would like try to do that similar to what they did with like the Pro Display XDR, right? Where they would like take something that many people want, which is like a pro level display. At that point, mini LED was still new and very exciting, even with relatively low density of dimming zones, and Apple then tuned it for like reference mode stuff and things like that, and it made it super expensive. Now, what would Apple do with like OLED, right? Because the advantage that like LG has for themselves is like, well, they have their own panels. Samsung has also now their own QD OLED panels, which are actually really great, supposedly. Now, Apple would have to buy those panels, then they would have to get the logistics right, how many people are actually going to want to buy them, and at what price, right? What kind of margin would Apple be able to dictate, given that, well, Apple could probably integrate like Apple TV functionality really well into it, but an Apple TV is $150 to $200, and a TV would not be upgradable, right? While with an Apple TV, you just disconnect your old Apple TV and you connect a new one, and it's much faster, much better, right? Apple would have to make sure that it works well with the consoles and PCs and stuff like that. I don't think that Apple also would be able to provide much differentiation that would actually like excite them with in a way that they could then come out and say, well, now we want 30 to 40% profit margins on this product. I think the upfront investment might not actually be that high relative to everything else that Apple is developing, like with Vision Pro, but the end result would also be like TVs are upgraded basically every year. Apple does not like upgrading certain accessories every year. Look at like the AirPods, right? It's not like Apple is like upgrading them randomly every year to coincide with a new iPhone launch. So they then would also have to compete with an industry that does like shows like twice a year when it comes to like all their new panel technology and shit like that. So no, I think Apple could do a TV, but I don't think they will do. I think it's pretty similar at this point as with the Apple Car. I think everything points to that the Apple Car probably ain't happening because the upfront investment is big, but then with cars, the actual production investment is even bigger. And right now, there's a big question to, well, Tesla for years has been the market leader. Tesla just dropped under 60% market share with EVs because the likes of BMW, Mercedes, VW, Audi, Porsche, Hyundai, Kia, and then of course your BYDs and all the other Chinese brands are coming in. Like for some reason Toyota ain't a big player, but I guess that's their own fault. But like Apple would then have to compete with all those companies also for like lithium supply for their batteries, or they would have to launch their car with a revolutionary new technology that is not lithium dependent, which obviously is also like high in the sky, a dream to like plan this. So I think Apple can do a lot, but I think there's a good like, do you guys remember like that little video that Apple made for WWDC not too long ago? Or I actually don't remember if it was WDC, but it was like 1,000. I will not play it because it will get a copyright strike by Apple. But like that for every no, for every yes, there are 1,000 no's at Apple, right? That there's a very careful selection of features and products and services that they decide to work on, even that it might mean killing a lot of stuff that might be exciting to them or that might be potentially even successful, but that just doesn't vibe with Apple. It wouldn't be unique enough if it were made by Apple. It wouldn't be special enough. It wouldn't be easy to integrate into the ecosystem. So I think that Apple can do a lot, but I think Apple very smartly chooses to not do that much. They already do, by the way, way more than they ever used to do. Like we have AirPods, we have HomePods, we have Apple TVs, right? We have a broad lineup of iPhones, iPads, Macs. Apple now makes their own processors. There's probably way too diverse iPad lineup, so there's a lot. I think saying no to something like a TV is ultimately very smart. If at you have to go, that's absolutely understandable. I know timing can be a little difficult for you, so thank you for joining. Whichever I see a new Apple event coming soon, I'm gonna be excited. Thompson Quiz, there might not be an Apple event, but we might get like half a dozen of blog posts, right? We might get an iPad mini announcement, then an iPad Air announcement, then an iMac announcement, and stuff like that. And even if not every single thing there is like super exciting, overall I think just the amount of information that would be coming our way, I think that's exciting. I just briefly wanted to make sure we are now half an hour in. That's when I usually remind you guys, if you're someone who haven't yet subscribed, please consider subscribing, liking, sharing, doing all the YouTube jazz as I call it. And if you really enjoy this content, please consider supporting this channel directly. You can find the link to my Patreon in the channel description, or you can directly in the chat send a super chat or a super sticker if you feel like it, of course, and if you can afford it. So that basically concludes the iMac, right? There isn't that much detail about it. It's just like a new rumor that it might also go up from just M1 to also M2 and M2 Pro. Remains to be seen how well that gets cooled if they don't introduce like a larger iMac, but yeah, that would be at least something interesting, right? I don't think it would be particularly exciting as when we finally get an M3 iMac, or just M3's chips in Macs across the board, but it at least would be something, right? So the other thing would be like an iPad mini 7 that finally fixes jelly scrolling, has a new camera and a new chip, and then an iPad Air upgrade that would have definitely a new chip and maybe other upgrades like a new Wi-Fi modem and stuff like that. So definitely not like the biggest rumors ever, but definitely still stuff that I believe is exciting to the wider Apple community. I know I have cultivated a community that is like really excited about iPads, because I usually get more excited about iPads than many other content creators. But beyond that, I also of course understand that the iPhone in a way is still king. And we are getting some interesting, albeit not necessarily that new rumors for the iPhone 16 Pro. Now, the iPhone 15 Pro, in my opinion, has been a more substantial upgrade than I expected. Now, the A17 Pro might not be the largest leap in processing ever, but it introduces some new stuff like ray tracing and neural engine-based Metal FX upscaling. The cameras, even though the hardware is pretty much identical except for the new 5x camera on the Pro Max, have seen very meaningful quality upgrades. Even the new modems are great. The Wi-Fi 6E is cool to have. The X70 modem is like really fantastic. By all accounts, it seems to be like the best performing like 5G phone ever, which is insane. We now of course have USB-C, also with USB 3 speeds. However, there's always something new, and there's always something next, and there's always something to get excited about. And there's also always something that isn't quite yet perfect in the current devices. And I think there's actually enough for us to be excited about with the next gen iPhone 16 Pro. Now, I usually use like those websites like Mac Rumors as a kind of backdrop for you guys to also check out what exactly I'm talking about, right? You can basically see the link here. However, obviously I've internalized most of the stuff that it's been talked about, so I try to still speak freely. I know some people have asked, why do I even have this open if I speak freely anyway? And some people are like, well, if you have this open, why don't you read it? Well, that's why it's sort of to give you sometimes auxiliary information that I might not mention verbally, and it's also to just give you context of how exactly I got that info. It's basically like a source report, one might say. So this is from analyst Jeff Poo from Haitong International Securities. Jeff Poo has a somewhat mixed track record, but it's not terrible, I guess. He's kind of known to really pick up on some rumors from Min-Chi Kuo or Mark Gurman and then regurgitate those rumors a couple of weeks or months later. So definitely, I mean, it's not the worst approach, I guess, one could take. But what is he specifically saying we should expect in next year's iPhone 16 Pro? Well, the iPhone 16 Pro will basically continue a lot of the improvements that we have seen ever since the iPhone 12, also of course now just this year's iPhone 15 Pro. It would keep up with the trend of getting the latest 5G modem from Qualcomm. It would be the X75 modem, which would finally offer 5G advanced, right? It offers up to 7.5 gigabits per second top speeds, I believe. Though, of course, those top speeds are very difficult to reach, right? It's like 5G Advanced is sort of like what we had with 4G Advanced, right? It's basically finally fulfilling the promises of the original technology that definitely fell short in its first couple of years. Also, with this new modem, you can use like 25% less circuit board area and up to 20% less power. For the iPhone, that's especially important because Apple puts the modems like almost like a sandwich with the rest of the motherboard and the processor, which means that there's a lot of heat trapping behind the main processor and their 5G modem, and that means that the iPhone, even though it's already not the best when it comes to dissipating heat from its main processor, well, when you add on top of that heat from the 5G modem, well, that can lead to a lot of heat buildup, and then the display has to dim to reduce any other heat building processes. Maybe something needs to throttle either the processor or the modem. That is not great. So basically everything that reduces power makes it more efficient. Because you are very unlikely to ever utilize like the full speeds, you're actually very likely to benefit much more from the efficiency gains, and that is definitely nice to see here. So this is coming from Jeff Poo. This is very, very likely. However, I will also note right away that supposedly that the regular iPhone 16 and 16 Plus would not be getting that modem, that for the first time in a while they would get an older modem, which in this case would be the X70 modem, which is both in the 15 and 15 Plus and 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max. So in this case the iPhone 16s would actually be in a way like less advanced than the 15 and 15 Plus, because those got the latest modems for their time, while the 16 and 16 Plus got like last year's modem. That would also continue the trend. Some of that would continue with Wi-Fi, where sorry, that's the wrong news site, is that the iPhone 16 Pro would get Wi-Fi 7. Wi-Fi 7 has like really, really fast peak speeds. I believe somewhere it says like 46 gigabits. Obviously, I'm not sure you will ever reach that, but that's an interesting thing. Like Apple advertises Wi-Fi 6E as 2.4 gigabits, so I wouldn't be surprised if like it was like 5 gigabits on Wi-Fi 7, because that would be an insane jump to make. iPhone 16 should be announced next year. Yeah, of course it will be. Yeah. Like, we're getting iPhones every year, dude. Even if some individual announcement might have to get cancelled, we still will get new iPhones. It's just like people have like their carrier contracts and stuff like that. They sort of rely on new iPhones to launch. Apple also, of course, does not necessarily want to piss off the carriers that they work with. They want to have something new to sell. So yeah, we are getting iPhone 16 next year, definitely. And by all account, the 16 series will be very much like the 15 series, right? a regular model, a plus model, a pro model, and then a pro max model, or potentially an ultra model. Now I've heard some rumors that an ultra model might be separate from a Pro Max, that it might be a little like almost inspired by like the Apple Watch Ultra, that it would be more rugged, have like even longer battery life, it would be like super thick and heavy, which I mean that sort of works with like a watch, because like the non-ultra watches are pretty light and small. Like the Pro Max is not light and small. Like the Apple Watch Ultra basically goes up to the size of like a large watch, around like 50 millimeters. That's not an unstandard size. But what would an iPhone Ultra will be if a Pro Max keeps existing? Are we talking about like beyond 7 inches diagonally? That would be just insane. Are we talking about like an A18 Pro Plus chip or anything like that? Are we talking about an M3 bin down in any way? I just don't see the point here, to be honest. So we would be getting a much faster X75 modem, yes, which could, yeah, I was right, it does up to 7.5 gigabits. Then the 16 Pro would get Wi-Fi 7. And as I said, with the potentially iPhone 16, the non-Pro, still keeping the X70 modem, it would get an upgrade from the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus, this time moving to Wi-Fi 6E, which was the first time introduced on an iPhone with the 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max, right? So we've had like other Android phones with it, we've had like other Apple devices with Wi-Fi 6E prior. Hell, the Google Pixel 8 already has like Wi-Fi 7 even on their cheaper models, but we would get Wi-Fi 6E on the 16 and 16 Plus, and then Wi-Fi 7 on the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max. Of course, that all builds on top of other rumors, including a larger display, right? The displays would be 0.2 inches larger, so going from 6.1 inch on the Pro to 6.3 inches, and from going from 6.7 inches on the Pro Max to 6.9 inches. Some have speculated that that change to like almost a full 7 inches diagonally would be enough for Apple justify to change the branding from the Pro Max to Ultra. However, that to me would just be an exercise in branding and nothing that substantial. The other point would be that 5x optical zoom, we would still keep the same basic camera assembly, right? The f2.8 aperture, the 12 megapixel slightly larger sensor than was on the 3x zooms, and now we would get that 5x optical both on the Pro and the Pro Max with the 16 generation, while it's currently 15 Pro Max exclusive. But because those devices would get just a tiny bit larger, and I do have a prior video where I talk about like the overall like dimensions of the 16th gen, supposedly they would also get a little heavier with it. Now we would have the extra space needed to incorporate the 5x zoom. Important to consider here is that the regular iPhone 16 and 16 Plus would still keep 6.1 and 6.7 inch displays, and they would still be LTPS, not LTPO, so they're very likely to still be limited to 60 Hz and not support always on display, while the iPhone 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max would likely get around probably like the best LTPO panel available at that point, which would maybe even allow them to like allow higher brightness than the 2000 nits than they currently advertise. And last but not least would be a new ultra wide lens. Now I have recently reacted to the Pixel camera to the Google Pixel 8 camera comparison by Superstaff versus the iPhone 15 Pro Max. I found that the iPhone 15 Pro Max on average offers better images in my opinion. One exception was though the ultra wide camera. I think the ultra wide on the Pixel 8 Pro is definitely better, and part of that is that it's 48 megapixel. It uses a larger sensor, and in this case Apple would follow suit. The ultra wide lens on the 16 Pro models will get a new 48 megapixel sensor, a huge leap from the current 12 megapixel sensor. Now obviously a 48 megapixel sensor will not have to be like 4 times larger than a 12 megapixel sensor, but I do assume it would be like at least like 15 to 20% larger as a sensor. Also, probably it would be like a newer generation sensor from Sony that is like really well tuned for like quad Bayer stuff. So tuning 4 pixels into 1 if you want to. Also, with Apple's new algorithms, it's very likely that it would by default offer 24 megapixel images. So they would be noticeably sharper than just the regular 12 megapixel from the older sensor that we currently have. And then I assume something probably like on the iPhone 17, we might then get 48 megapixels as well on the zoom camera. Maybe it would still be 5x, maybe it would be variable zoom by that point. Apple's, by the way, zoom cameras, I just want to give them a big shout out, a big compliment. It's amazing that Apple's like 12 megapixel wins against like the Google Pixel 8 like 50 megapixel 5x zoom. So I'm actually really excited once Apple goes with like a next generation of sensors, which hopefully will come with a noticeable quality leap, because the main sensor currently is just so good that even though the zoom and the ultra wide are pretty close when it comes to color reproductions, they just cannot replicate like the same like shadow detail handling, the same dynamic range. So in this case, yeah, going with newer, bigger 48 megapixel sensors starting with the ultra wide, and then hopefully eventually continuing that for the 5x cameras would be ideal. So I'm actually really looking forward to that. And the last point is we of course are getting the A18 Pro on the 16 Pro, and we are getting it based on TSMC's N3E, which would be the second generation of their 3 nanometer design, and that would be obviously a little more efficient, a little more performant. Now there are some ways in which N3E is actually a little worse, like it's not technically as dense as the N3B chips currently can be, like what the A17 Pro is using. However, it depends exactly on which you choose, right? By the latest standard, then you can also be like you can also like wait for N3P at this point, right? Which then is like 5% more speed and offers 10% more efficiency, and then also offers more density. Well, N3E is a little bit of a sidestep. It's like easier to build than N3B. It's definitely a nice thing to have, and it's going to be powering the A18 Pro, which we haven't heard that many rumors about. Supposedly we are keeping with 8 gigabytes on the Pro models, and then the non-Pro models would also get 8 gigabytes, but then the Pros would either get LPDDR5X or even 5T, which would be like 30 to 50% faster than the current memory that we have. That would definitely help a lot with graphics performance, which unfortunately has been stalling a little bit ever since the A15 chip. We have like gotten like new graphics tech, right? Like your ray tracings, your Metal FX upscalings, your mesh shading. But when it just comes to raw compute, the recent gains have not been as big, unfortunately. Yeah, there's also the rumor about the 16 and 16 Plus supposedly getting an A17 chip, but that one would also be based on N3E. And it's important to consider that N3E is not backwards compatible with N3B. So Apple would need to essentially redesign a lot of the A17 Pro to then make an A17 for N3E. This is why my speculation has been that Apple would would give an A18 chip for the 16 and 16 Plus, but then would give the 16 Pro and Pro Max an A18 Pro. And I've outlined in the prior videos how those could be differentiated. One point would be maybe an ever so slightly higher max clock speed on an A18 Pro. Maybe an A18 would have 5 GPU cores, and then an A18 Pro would have 6 GPU cores, or even if Apple has like more GPU cores than that, maybe then the A18 Pro has like 7 or 8 cores, and then in response the regular A18 has like 1 core less than that. And then of course you can also differentiate them with the memory bandwidth, which if you have fewer GPU cores you also need less memory bandwidth, so the A18 could get like still regular LPDDR5, while the A18 Pro gets like LPDDR, as I said, either 5X or 5T. What exactly we will see. Yeah, and so there's a lot of info that I've thrown your way. I apologize. I know I've also talked really fast because my throat is really dry. I don't want to make this unnecessarily long. Thank you guys so much for joining the chat. I always like seeing new people here. Obviously, with so many new subscribers, from so many different parts of the world, I have to make sure I find a good time where as many people as possible can join, but I am trying to find a balance. And of course I'm also trying to find a balance between like live streams and smaller videos that I post, but we'll get there. I mean, it's been less than a month since this channel started getting somewhat big, or I guess big by its small standards, so I appreciate all your support, all your outreach, all your messaging on Twitter and stuff like that, all of you joining the chat, all of you leaving likes, comments, etc. Of course, anybody who chooses to support this channel directly, it's also a big thank you from me on that part. And beyond that, I'm just super excited to see if we actually get new hardware this month. I'll keep you posted if and when such things actually drop. If Apple announces an event, or if Apple announces it through their newsroom blog post, I'll definitely keep you posted here as well. And of course, follow me on Twitter. Well, you will really know when I'm going live, but also hit the notification bell, because then you might know when I'm going live, because for some reason, as I've heard from several people, the notification bell is just unfortunately not very reliable. So I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.